Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about the legislative branch. Hi, Bill. And of course, the primary job of the legislative branch is to be the law making body of government out of the three branches of government, often known as Congress or Parliament or national assemblies and that kind of thing. Next, we'll do executive and then finish off with judicial. The number one job of the legislative branch is to make laws or policies. Usually, you have representatives that represent the people in a democratic style government. And those representatives pass policies to meet the will of the people. That's why they exist. So they create laws, legislation for the people to follow. Eventually, those laws need to be passed by your chief executive, the president. Their second biggest job is to levy taxes. And this is kind of an informal check of power on the executive. The power of the purse lays within the legislative branch. The executive branch all the time will say, hey, we want this kind of stuff to happen in government. It's really expensive and pronounced and whatever. But eventually, the legislative branch is going to say, oh, sure, you can have money for that, or no, you can't have money for that. So the legislative branch actually has a considerable amount of power using that leverage. The second thing they do is what's known as executive oversight. The primary power of executive oversight is the confirmation power, that the legislative branch can confirm judges, national judges like a Supreme Court, or members of the president's cabinet in a presidential style system. And they can remove those people through the process of impeachment, which, of course, is the legislative branch deciding, usually 2/3 of the upper house deciding, you're done, you're out of here. So they can confirm and remove those people through the process of impeachment. Remember that a president, vice president, judges, members of the cabinet all can be impeached and removed from power. Veto override is the next thing. If the legislative branch believes, 2/3 of the entire legislative branch believes that a law should be passed regardless of the veto of a chief executive, then they can use 2/3 vote. And that veto is overridden and the law actually becomes law. By the way, another executive oversight that is not on here, and again, is a formal check, is to make sure that whatever the money says that we've said you can spend, that you're actually spending it on that thing, not on something else. So that's why you'll often see members of the executive branch come into the legislative branch for a hearing about, like, hey, are you spending the money how we said you can spend it? If not, then what's going on? The final one is treaty power. Treaties are written by the executive branch, but they have to be approved by the legislative branch to become official. That means entering and leaving a treaty. If you say you're in a treaty, but the legislative branch never approves it, then you're not technically in a treaty. You're just kind of in one that the next, like, the next chief executive can simply remove with an executive order. There have been things like NATO. NATO is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, a security treaty, defense treaty that was with us and Canada and other European powers. There was a question of whether, can any one president in a presidential system just simply remove us from NATO? And the answer is no. It would take Congress to say we're no longer in NATO anymore, and that treaty would have to be approved by the legislative branch. Understand it, in a democratic government, your legislative branch must be independent of any other branch of government. They must be able to represent the will of the people, not the will of the chief executive. If the legislative branch is simply blindly following the will of the executive branch, that is what is known as a rubber stamp legislative. Like, just Mr. President or Prime Minister, just send me whatever you want, and I'll just go, boom, it's good. It'll always happen. That's not an independent branch of government. It has to be independent for a democracy to work. So let's see what the legislative branches are and which ones are stronger in the AP6. Obviously, the House of Lords, which is appointed by a monarch, and the House of Commons is the lower house that is elected. And in the UK, obviously, the House of Commons with parliamentary sovereignty is stronger. In Mexico, you have the Senate and the Chamber of Deputies. Legislative branch in Mexico is fairly weak. The executive is considerably stronger. But if you want to go for, which one is technically stronger, it is the Senate, the Mexican Senate. Nigeria has the Senate and House of Representatives, both of which are elected. Again, Legislative branch is fairly weak. In Nigeria, executive is much stronger, but technically the Senate is the upper house and stronger. Russia has the Federation Council, which is appointed by the governors of each independent region. The governors, by the way, are appointed by Vladimir Putin, the president. And you have the Duma, which is elected in quotes because the elections aren't really free or fair or consistent. The Duma is stronger, but let's also realize that we're talking about an authoritarian power that is run by Vladimir Putin. Iran has a unicameral legislative branch. The other ones have bicameral, which is of two houses. Unicameral means one house. The Majlis is elected, of course. And China has the National People's Congress, which is technically kind of the local people elect their people, but it's party controlled, and we'll get to that in a moment. Remember that simply because you vote for your legislative branch doesn't mean you actually have a democratically styled government. Take, for instance, Iran. Iran has the Majlis, and the Majlis is elected. But who really has the power in Iran? Is it the Majlis? No, it is, of course, the Guardian Council. Remember that the Guardian Council vets candidates for who can go on the ballot. It can veto any laws it does not see as Muslim enough, and it supervises all the elections. So the Majlis really is not an elected democratic institution and not independent. And reality here is, of course, the Guardian Council dictates what goes on, and at the highest level, it's the supreme leader. Then in China, you have the National People's Congress. This is the elected locally, but that's not really who controls the lawmaking process in China. Unlike in Iran, where you have the supreme leader dictating what's going on through the Guardian Council, China's a little different. China has what's called the Standing Committee of the Politburo. The Standing Committee of the Politburo is the ultimate lawmaking institution within China. Is it constitutionally? No, it's the National People's Congress according to its document. But the reality is the Standing Committee of the Politburo. So what is the Standing Committee of the Politburo? Understand, China is a communist state. And in every communist state, nothing matters more than the party. The Communist Party always dictates what goes on, not lawmakers, not the people. It's the Communist Party. And in China, there are 96 million members of the Chinese Communist Party. And they go all the way from the bottom level, which is your party Congress. This is your regional and local representatives. And out of that, you have a specialized central committee, which has about 205 members. Then you have what usually is the highest level in most communist systems. That is your Politburo. This is a small group that in normal communist states, like the Soviet Union, you have the Soviet Politburo that makes the decisions. In China, they have another level. That level is the 7 members of the Politburo Standing Committee. They make the ultimate decisions in what gets passed inside China. And right now, the Chinese Politburo Standing Committee was pretty much purged by this dude, Xi Jinping, the president of China. He's basically got everybody on there that's going to do what he wants. So the Chinese Communist Party essentially is represented by whoever's in the Politburo Standing Committee, or now it's going to be pretty much all Xi Jinping. So the party is that leader, just like it was with Mao Zedong back when communism first hit China. Okay. This brings us to something that happens in communist states, and this is the idea that you have a parallel government within communist states. For every government function, National People's Congress, the provincial or regional governments, and local governments, you have a party apparatus that parallels it, that actually has the power. So National Party Congress is the real power. They meet every 5 years instead of every year for the National People's Congress. You have the provincial, regional party mechanisms that actually oversee the government. You have the local party mechanism that oversees the local government. And the brains of it all is going to be the Standing Committee of the Politburo that makes all the decisions. So in a communist state, that parallel government is the party has, parallels that the government, and oversees it and makes sure that it does what it's supposed to do. And of course, the National People's Congress technically selects who the president is. Of course, Xi Jinping is the president in this case, but it's a complete and total rubber stamp on what Xi Jinping wants because Xi Jinping is basically the Chinese Communist Party. What he thinks goes. But in communist countries, including China, party is always over government. Anytime the will of the party, they say goes. So when it comes to legislative control in Nigeria, in Mexico, in the UK, hey, we're talking about places that are actually independent legislative branches. When we're talking about Iran and China, it's definitely not. Okay, the Guardian Council has say, Expedient Council, but we don't know enough, so I'd stick with the Guardian Council. But then in China, Standing Committee, the Politburo has the final say. And to have a legitimate democratic style government, that legislative branch must be independent.